I actually first came to the center kind of an informal basis in 1968. My wife and I were traveling to California to take up a new postdoc job at SLAC. We came over the pass, I think it was unpaved at the time, and came and spent about 3 days here, camped up at Maroon Lake, and hung around the center for a while. I don't have too much memory of it except that I went to a fish fry that was hosted by Pete Carruthers, and I think he'd been fishing that day. We had a great time. Fish was terrific, and I was kind of stargazing, I think, at the time. I was meeting people whose papers I'd been reading in graduate school, and so it was kind of memorable for us. But I never really got back to the center in an official way till 1974. I think there's various reasons. We were having kids and going to Europe and whatnot, and so we didn't get back here till then. 74 was a great year for me. It was right after the advent of gauge field theories, and the workshop was exciting. And some of the work that has been most important in my career, I actually started that summer in 1974 here. So that was great. Came back again in 77 and 79. I don't have too much memory of those years except breaking my wrist playing tennis on the Gant tennis courts with John Schwartz in 77. And climbing Capitol Peak and working my way across the knife edge with Sasha Polyakov in 79, something I will absolutely never do again. But those are my memories of the 70s. And then again, for reasons I don't entirely remember, we just didn't get back here. We enjoyed it tremendously, but for various reasons, we had another kid, we went off to Europe, and just never came back again for 7 years. And then in 1986, we said, well, let's give it another shot, and came back and just loved it. By that time, we had a 5-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old son. And it was a great summer, and so I just got hooked. We came again in 87, and I was so hooked by 87 that we decided to buy a condominium here at the Gant, which we did that summer, and we've had it ever since. Probably the only good financial investment I've ever made. So that was a kind of hook too. We liked the center so much, we liked Aspen so much that we decided to buy into it a bit and started coming, and just year after year. And I don't remember exactly how I started to get more involved in the management of the center, but in various little ways in the late 80s I got brought into various things. I think I was elected a member sometime, must have been in the late 1980s, I don't exactly remember, maybe 1990. And then in 1992, I think it was, the summer of 1992, but I could be off by a year, I got a phone call while I was in Italy from Dave Schramm, who was, I don't know what he was, I guess he was serving as a search committee chair or something, asking me if I'd like to serve as president of the center. So I did, thought about it for a while, and I took it on and started the presidency in the summer of 1993. So I served as president from 93 to 96, and it was a very exciting time at the center. A lot of things happened. I certainly enjoyed it immensely. It was very rewarding. I guess the three things that I kind of see as a highlight, or the things I remember from my presidency, were, first of all, the fundraising and then the building of Smart Hall and the Flug Forum. That was a big part of what happened then. Another thing I'm very proud of is that I think it was the time when we really increased the level of activity by women in the center. I think it was the summer of so let me talk about that. I think it was the summer of 1994, in order to jumpstart and increase more rapidly than I think could otherwise have been done, the participation of women as in the scientific programs and among the officers and members of the center. We organized something called a Focal Week on Women, which ran for a week and was, when the idea was first brought up, I'd say there was a spectrum of views about whether we ought to do it, because it was different. It was something we just had never done before. But we stuck to it. I know Mike Turner was very involved. He had just stepped down as president, and several others were involved. Catherine Callan was very involved. And we brought a whole bunch of interesting women scientists, and some other interesting people to town that week. And I thought it was just great. It was, the scientific talks were good. The talks about how to increase the participation of women were good. I especially remember the role of Sheila Tobias, who is a well-known author, and someone I had actually known as a graduate student at Cornell in the late 60s. We worked together on the McCarthy campaign, actually, and so it was fun to see her again. And I think she added a lot to it. It was the life of the party in many ways. So I think it was great. It had a terrific effect, and I think it was kind of the beginning of a rapid increase in participation of women in the center. So that's something I'm very proud of and very, very glad we did. The other thing we did when I was chair right at the end of my presidency was to find a new administrative vice president for the center. Sally Mensimer, who had been doing it since the early 1960s, had announced her retirement, her plans to retire. And we set about finding her successor. We had a search committee, which I think I chaired. Was really just the executive committee of the trustees that did it. I remember Pierre Ramon being involved. I remember Catherine Callan being involved, and several others. And search went on for several weeks, all through that summer. And we were considering all sorts of different possibilities for finding someone to succeed Sally. But at some point, I think it was really Sally who first suggested that we really should interview Jane Kelly. And so she came in rather late in the process and just kind of knocked our socks off. I mean, the minute she was done with the interview, I think all of us on the committee just said, that's it. We have found our successor to Sally. And we had, and we made her a good offer, which she accepted, and I now realize, just sitting here today, that she's actually been in the job for 10 years, or just about 10 years, because it was the summer of '95 that I think maybe 96, now that I think about it, that we ran that search. But it is just about 10 years. So that's another nice thing that happened during the time I was president.
I think you said there were three, the building was the other.
The building was the other. And the building was a very big thing that we took on about halfway through my presidency. And the first order of business in trying to construct a new building was to set up a development campaign, which we did. We needed to do some fundraising. So we, by that time, had a number of very helpful non-scientific members on our board. In particular, Michael Fain and Larry Marks got very involved and served as co-chairs of what we call the New Century Campaign. We set that up, and it has to be, I think, the summer of '96. Like all these things, I'm off. I could be off by 1 year. Could have been '95, but probably '96. And we got it started then, and I think it was very successful. We did development work both here in the Valley and outside the Valley. I worked very closely at the time with Dave Schramm, who was chairman of the Board of Trustees, and I think a lot of the credit for the success of the campaign has to go to Dave. He worked very hard. His contacts in the Valley at the time were much better than mine, and he used them. And we got to know a lot of very helpful people and people who supported us. So Dave really played a very central role. I can remember all kinds of development events, talks that Dave and I gave to potential donors, to people here in Aspen. So that was a lot of fun. And in the end, we've got a lot of support from people here in Aspen, Marty Flug in particular, and Jerry Hosier in particular. Also Michael Fain and Larry Marks not only gave their time, but they gave generously, financially, to the campaign as well. And the other thing that made it go was that, that I had known for some time Doug Stone, who's my colleague at Yale, and who has family connections to something called the Smart Family Foundation in Greenwich, Connecticut. So we made contact with them through Doug. Doug was extremely helpful, and the Smart Family Foundation also turned out to be a major donor for the new building, and that's the reason it's called Smart Hall. The president of that foundation was, and I suppose still is, Ray Smart, a good friend of Doug's and a family connection there as well. So we got to know Ray. Ray made a number of visits out here and started to learn about the programs of the center, what we were doing, what our plans were, got quite interested. And in the end, the Smart Family Foundation was very generous. Gave us a major gift that allowed us to go ahead and move ahead on the new building on a much more rapid pace than we, I think, ever thought we might be able to.
Being president, what's it like being president? How can a physicist be president?
Well, I think the first thing to understand about being the president of the Aspen Center for Physics is that it is, like all the officer positions here, volunteer work. It's something that we do when we're out here. It, of course, runs into other times of the year as well, but it's not a paid position. It's not something that we do, you know, instead of something else. I was a professor at Yale when I started, and then about 1 year into my presidency here, in fact, I was asked to become dean of the graduate school at Yale, which I did from 95 to 98, 93 to 98. So actually, had I known that the deanship was going to come my way at Yale, I'm not at all sure I would have taken on the presidency of the Physics Center. But as it turned out, it was fine. They were very compatible. Most of the work having to do with the center took place in the summer. Most of the deanship work was during the academic year. So it worked just fine. But what does the president do? The president just generally oversees almost all aspects of the center. There are financial aspects. There's working with the administrative vice president, Jane Kelly, and the financial person, and the other staff members here. There's looking over the scientific program of the center. That means establishing the committee that sets the program. There's looking over admissions to the center. That means establishing the committee that determines admissions, and in just every way manages the affairs of the center. So it's a busy job, and it's a responsible job, and we've been very fortunate to have had a number of very good presidents over the years. I was asked to serve as chairman of the board about 4 years ago, and I've been doing it since then. I think currently planning to do it 1 more year. It's a position that isn't as onerous as the presidency. Formal responsibilities are actually quite few. Chair the annual meeting, and by tradition over the last few years, the chairman of the board has also chaired the development committee. So I've been doing development work. Development work hasn't been nearly as intense as it was during the New Century campaign when we were putting up the new building, but we continue to do it. We've been running an annual campaign in recent years, and we've been thinking about various aspects of our financial future here. So I've been very involved in that. I'd say more generally what being chairman of the board means is being available to talk to the president. I'd say during the year, Andre Ruckenstein, the current president, probably calls me up once a month to talk about something, some decision that has to be made or some issue. So I serve as a kind of sounding board, I think, and hopefully gives occasionally some good advice to the president. So it's been nice. I've enjoyed it, and I'll be happy to hand it on to someone else next year.